I'm Majid Marabti, and I'm Professor of Network Systems and Head of the Distributed Multimedia Systems at Liverpool John Moores University. I came into computing more by accident than choice, in that I did a first degree Maths, Stats and Computing in Liverpool, and computing was a minor part of that course, and I got intrigued by the programming computers, and in those days it was just after the punch card, so there wasn't a great deal of interactivity that you can do. So to strengthen and deepen my experience, I went to do a master's in computer studies at Lancaster University, not too far from here. And in there I perhaps found my vocation, in that I come across computer networks. This is the early 80s, and there weren't many centers for computer networks, but Lancaster was one of them. And I eventually convinced Professor David Hutchinson to supervise me for a project on the computer networks. And that's really when I found perhaps my true vocation, networking and research. And soon after that, I was lucky enough to join Professor Wilbur's team at University College London as a researcher, working on distributed systems. And in the very early 80s, distributed systems were very, I suppose, unsophisticated, in that RPC, remote procedure call, was just created. And Professor Wilbur had a large team to develop new applications. My task was to do an evaluation of the performance of one of the first experimental networks at 2 megabits per second. 2 megabits per second now does not seem to very fast, but in those days it was very interesting and very complicated. UCL, of course, was the center for networking in the UK, in that they were the first node out of the ARPANET and obviously the internet. So it was an amazing experience. After that, I ended up going back to link up with Professor Hutchinson again to work with him on a project to do with networking in industry, and that looking at issues of real-time systems, which were a real challenge. Joining Liverpool John Moores University was a very, very interesting experience, different from the previous ones. The previous ones I was working with well-established teams. In John Moores, the challenge was, how do I start a new research group in distributed systems, in particular, since that was my specialism, with very little support, in that most of the staff were interested in other areas, not networking. And it was, I suppose, an uphill struggle, and had enough support from the university as well as the school and colleagues to create the distributed multimedia systems, which is the group that I still lead to this day. The changes in technology from those days, back in the early 90s, we were just looking at World Wide Web, and we were thinking of challenges of how to transfer and deliver video on stream online, that we do now currently, but the challenge is there, how to have a quality of service, how to add information on the fly, how to perhaps encrypt or reduce the size of files and others. That led me on to the latest challenges over the last 5-6 years. We can see that there is a proliferation of small devices. I'm wearing one, as you can see in here, a phone that's got Wi-Fi, that's got Bluetooth, that's got all other technologies that people are very familiar with. And if we look at those, how do we get all these devices to work together? How do we, when we move from one environment to another, from an office to another, from a home to other, get these devices to work together? And that gave rise to our first new lab, which we call Networked Appliances Lab, where we imagine and we expect all devices to have the ability to be able to transmit communication, send and receive. And if you have that, and you can see that within the home in particular, and that's why we say appliances, your fridges or your microwave or your telephone or your security systems or your lighting systems, your heating systems, all need to be managed. They all need to have some kind of information that's add intelligence, and then how do we then bring them together to work in a seamless fashion? And then when you have that, when you add a new device, what do? it is a real challenge. A new device could have a new protocols, could have a new operating systems, could have a new video or audio way of streaming. The challenge technically is how to bring those to work together in perhaps what one would call nirvana of our world is zero configuration time. You would have a non-expert bring in a device in a room, and the devices will get to talk to each other, work out the requirements, and then work seamlessly. So when I work to this consultation today, my computer could indirectly or directly launch an application that I'm trying to use, a demonstration that I will show you later on, and how to do it directly. This is the challenge that faces in networking, faces in distributed systems and applications, but also faces all industries. If you look at the like of Sony, a company that we work very closely on with both for networked appliances but also for games technology, they sell many of the white goods. And once you've sold all white goods to everybody, what else do you sell them? If you look at the likes of telecommunication services, they cable all the homes. They have NTL and you have others. And when you have that, what else do you sell to the people in the home? And the future for all of these companies is to sell services utilizing the devices that we all have, the networked appliances that we're talking about. So we collaborate with a number of organizations, including Panasonic United States and Sony in Japan, that specifically look at how to build the new hardware and software. In our case, is a middleware, a glue, if you like, that joins all the various applications and the various systems in a seamless interaction fashions. So then we can enable the facilities. It's got many other applications. In health, we work on sensor networks. So one can visualize a number of sensors around the body or around the home that tell us the changes in the environment, or if you have a particular patient which are ill, to see their heartbeat, the link directly to the networks. They could be directly linked to the computers. So those are the kind of challenges that we are trying to address in networked appliances. At the same time, the reverse of that, that's also been a challenging to us, and we have been working at it for the last 10 years, is to look at the ideas of security and privacy. If everything is wireless, anybody can listen, anybody can capture the waves from outside. How then can we ensure that when I walk into an office with my devices as a phone, I'm not picking information of the systems that are already communicating, or other people are picking information from me? So both of the ways is a challenge. And for that extent, we had created networked security systems that look at ubiquitous computing. We were lucky enough to get support from industry, but more crucially from the EPCRC, the Engineer Physical Research Council, to look at composition of services while preserving security and privacy. And again, this is a real challenge in that if you go back to the idea of operating systems, networking, capacity, capability, being together into zero configuration, how would you put those devices together at the same time ensuring that the information isn't leaking? People cannot breach your systems through that way. And for that, we have developed a number of algorithms as well as prototype solutions to do what we call dynamic composition. So on real time, bringing of services together to be able to do some dynamic change to make sure a specified set of securities or privacy targets are met. So the two sides are, I sometimes say them, two faces of the coin. One, you build the system, the other, you make sure it's secure and privacy. That involvement is also receiving a lot of interest. We work very closely with a local company, used to be called Marconi, but now it's Celex Communications. And we have just about to start a large project with Thales, who do security, but also military type of security work. Again, specifically for composition of services. And when we join that to the proliferations of sensors all over the place, cameras and the likes, the security will become even more challenging. The security problems become more challenging. Part of the school we run as I suppose a community service, the Northwest Warp, the warning advice for the local councils, and at the moment we are trying to start a new project to do the same for the fire service and the police. And out of the school, we have a number of colleagues working on picking up information from the internet, on viruses, on changes to security, and then filtering it for these colleagues. Those projects at the moment are supported by the Cabinet Office and the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister with a small seed grants to keep the grants. In fact, we've just been told that they're likely to be renewed for next year. So those two sides so that we do for both the research and both the community. At the same time, we're looking at how these changes are likely to affect the virtual world, both at home and in the place. And one of the biggest changes to, I suppose, the homes, now that all the homes are networked and they have very fast communication streams, is the fact that youngsters, and adults for that purpose, are very, very interested in playing computer games. And our third creation, our latest creation, is a computer games technology lab. The challenges there at the moment for us are how to build software that allow non-specialists to build games, because in the world of games you have to have artists, you have to have script writers, you have to have game players, you have to have storytellers, and all of these have to come together to bring any technology live into a game. And one of our interests at the moment, in fact, a project that's been kindly supported by the BBC, is to develop a generic game engine for the BBC developers to develop games, to put them on the BBC website, CBBC in particular. We had a small project last year with them that was quite successful, and they happily agreed to fund another follow-on. Now, the games wasn't just because it's the latest challenge, but it's also because it actually fits in very much with the view of distributed multimedia systems laboratories that I was talking about. The biggest growth in gaming is what's called online gaming. And online gaming is about playing virtual games from the home using the internet, using networking. So again, we face the same challenges of a huge amount of people playing games. How do you manage those kind of systems? So therefore we're talking about network management. But at the same time, they pose the same problem of privacy and security. Parents are very concerned about children playing games or getting onto websites they shouldn't be going to. So the challenge of that we looked at earlier on in our network security labs for privacy and security comes very much onto the games. In fact, it gets even more interesting than that, in that some people are very, very keen. If you look at some of the games like Second Life, people are living in the virtual world and trading in the virtual world with real money. And hundreds of thousands of dollars of real dollars are being spent on these games buying a monopoly type of game. Real life is a monopoly type game where you buy estates. And somebody actually lately reported to the police one of their assets being stolen. How would the police investigate such a problem? It's likely to occur more and more as people are spending a real virtual world, living a real virtual world. And one of the interesting projects that we look in the medium future is how one would blur the real to the imaginary, from the virtual to the real. We looked at deployment of sensor networks in the environment, in the home, in the streets. We see all kinds of cameras, all kinds of people checking who's passing by. Many of the popular games include crowds. One then could foresee very easily, and in fact one of the prototypes we're working on at the moment, is to play a game on a virtual world but linked up to a real world. So when you do a chase, it could be a chase in the street of Liverpool, because we have sensors, we have information feeding back, and it would be a real live virtual and non-virtual game. You can play it in a virtual world based in Sydney, but the chase would be run in Liverpool, because you would have those sensors. So those blurring of boundaries between the virtual and the real are becoming very, very interesting in everyday's work, but also in gaming. these are many applications that you can see both for tactical deployments, whether it's for the military or for health and disaster reactions, that you can blend the simulation to the real actions. Those are the kind of things that we really think would make a difference to us. To again go back to supporting the community for these initiatives, at Liverpool John Moores University we have 3 annual conferences. One called PGNet, which is postgraduate networking, which we have run over the last 10 years on behalf of the local community for networking in the UK, that only accept PhD students from all around the UK. And again, support from most of the community all over the country, and particularly Professor David Hutchinson, who tend to always very kindly provide speakers for us and other support. And for that, we usually get about 100 PhD students from most UK universities working in networking come to Liverpool for the last 9 years. The next one is happening in this June. 4 years ago, we also started the Games Technology Conference that bridges the industrial support as well as the interest from the students, but also from research. And we were lucky enough to get an international set of speakers over 3 days, both from the industry and the research communities. Games technology is quite important as one of the new challenges, as well as industries for wealth creation for the UK. Liverpool and the M62 corridors is the most important corridor for that kind of development in the UK. Sony labs that we work with have got the biggest development for games. In fact, most of the latest titles for the PS3 were developed in Liverpool. And I'm also very pleased and proud to say for the 5 launch games, every one of those had at least one of our former students working on them. So we're very, very pleased about that. The latest development that we are doing within the supporting the community and exchange with the industry and is to do with security. And this year we have the 3rd Forensic and Computer Security Conference. And we say forensic because sadly many of the crimes now involve IT or networking or communications in one way or the other. And for that particular things, we need a new kind of skills. The police, the government need a new skills for not only to find criminals through looking at evidence and incidents from fingerprinting and others, but also do fingerprinting in information files, just as important. And there is a new science of development. We work very closely with the local police. And in fact, one of our keynote speakers for this year's conference is the Chief Constable of Merseyside. So one of the, if you're watching this, perhaps you get in touch with us and join us for these. Earlier on in the discussion, I was mentioning a lot about the fact that a lot of people are now interacting all the time. And you hear of people talking through MySpace or YouTube, and they're all connected. Everyone is connected, and everyone without the internet is connected. In the jargon, we would call them ad hoc networks, in that people who don't know each other at all come into a room, come into a space, meet, do some business, and then go their separate ways. And the issues for those then is that exchange of information. It poses challenges both to security, to safety, but also to exchange of information, which is intellectual property right, digital rights management. What do we do when we get in exchange of information? And I have a little demo to show that if one were to run a social club or a local gathering, we can run it under a safety and security system that allow us to vet people who come in and people who have to live in. And when we exchange information, that kind of information is not necessarily guaranteed, because we cannot guarantee, but you have a modicum of security, so like a neighborhood watch, where we are more or less assured that people who don't misbehave will be excluded, will be ostracized from our group, without having to necessarily call on to a higher authority for policing. And I can show you how in a real life application does it to control that. And as you can see on the screen now next to me, we have a number of these blobs are all individuals who happen to be now start to join together into an ad hoc networks for communication, for exchange of information. This system, through our own software that we developed in the lab, allow you to monitor all these communications and then to build a set of requirements, one of which is the trust. How trustful is the next blob or person that you can talk to? This is now an ad hoc networking. You can see the oscillations going up and down. That's saying exchange of messages is happening all the time. Now this is the same network multiplied thousand folds, in that we think in a very, very wide networks over the internet. You can have hundreds of thousands of people. And all the green and blues are all these individuals who are exchanging information, so there is a fluctuations in the network. And what happened when one of the people, one of the hosts, decide to give information out that they're not supposed to give, other individuals would start checking into saying information is leaking out, how then can we stop it? And in our system, we'll just point anywhere and just start one misbehaving node. Here we have the bad behavior, the spread of information that we don't want to spread around the network happening. And very quickly we could see it spreading to the point where we say we would like now to stop it. And all the nodes starts communicating the information to each other to say whoever is the first person that started this information should be excluded from the network. And eventually we can see that we homed it down to one particular misbehaving node, and that node is being ostracized. This is without any outside control except in the individuals or their systems behaving together and collaborating together and bringing it to. These applications could be used not only to manage an ad hoc, a civil list, but also for controlling stolen software, stolen intellectual property, or even stopping viruses without having to go to a higher authority. Funding and research are always a challenge. I think you would find it from many colleagues that they say there is not enough money for research. It's true, because the UK is a very dynamic community. I think in citations it's probably only second to United States. So there is a lot of competition for UK government fund from the EPCRC. We're lucky enough to get grants to support some of these initiatives. But as much money coming to us in the school is from industry. And we have 3 ways of funding that kind of support from industry. We have contract consultancy work in these areas as well as others. We have worth generation projects that are usually supported by the DTI, usually called knowledge transfer projects. We work with a number of small companies in all these areas, and particularly networking in Liverpool area, to do technology transfer where it's half research and half development. Those are very successful for the local industry, but also very successful for us. And the third one is we get some money from the EU. Again, this is just as competitive. Perhaps the biggest influx of research input is the human one, and that comes from PhD students. I'm very pleased to say at Liverpool John Moores University we have over the years built a reputation with the local community, but particularly overseas, and we do get a steady supply of clever and committed research students from overseas, and perhaps a smaller supply from the UK, and that is a shame. I think that's all UK universities suffer from that, in that most of our UK students, the bright ones, tend to find jobs and have obviously these days got requirements for funding because of debts and others, and are rather enjoying industry. It is rather a shame, but we still have enough of a supply of UK students. But those are the ways that research is supported. We have international support from industry. For the last 5 years, we've had some support from Changhua Telecom, which is the equivalent to BT in Taiwan. And we've had research students from the labs as well as a financial support. Some I mentioned earlier on, Panasonic, we do some collaboration with them, and Sony in Japan for a small collaboration. and of course other inter-university collaboration. Those tend to be the basis of our research funding. And for me, I suppose as a head of a lab, perhaps that's the biggest challenge, is how to keep all these creative minds in the laboratories supported and resourced. I suppose perhaps a thank you to the people that made it possible for me, and I go back again to my old professor and boss and friends in David Hutchinson or Professor Wilbur, who I know has retired, who were very much at the forefront of helping me find my vocation, and I have truly found my vocation. And to the young people who really do the research. I and myself are here as an enabler, but much of the effort is done by very young, bright people who will be the generations of the future. And this is really the thank you to them. I think with regards to trends in the future, in some ways the areas that I've highlighted are very much at the start. I've already mentioned the fact that we do work on sensor networks. Sensor networks have got very many applications. You would hear on the government about perhaps looking at traffics on the motorways. Those in our jungle are sensor networks, the cameras, the devices on the street, the devices on the car when you talk about control from those. So the deployment for health and disaster, one of my research students, in fact, just about to submit a thesis looking at critical infrastructure support in the case of disasters such as an earthquake or even terrorist attacks. How do you do for those kind of whether it's medical triage or communication infrastructure. So those are very, very much challenges. Security is the same. There is a lot of worries and concerns about how does the critical infrastructure support into disasters. And we would see more and more effort towards those. I think on the particular development for the military, I think it's very well known that these are new developments to be incorporated in the things. UK and US governments are very much interested in these developments. Security and privacy, they're perhaps even bigger challenges, not only because of the threats of disaster and terrorism, but also the fact that everything about us is being logged. We have in the laboratory some garments that you could use for heating. That's the heat conducting garments. You could have them into the home for people who are in palliative care or others who need other support because it's very difficult to do. So these are the challenges that we can see, these technologies that we're developing in the labs being used for medical environments where medical consultation is done from afar, where most of the consultations and the information gathered on the patients is done as they are. So wearable clothes. I'm talking about the phone, but you can have others, devices that monitor heartbeat, or talking about shoes, you can have socks, but talking all those things. Those are the things. The issues of security, again, going back to it, when I talked about blurring the virtual and the real, again, where do we stop? How do we manage that? Those are very, very much crucial for the next 10, 15 years developments.